Welcome to the Half Yard Line. I am Tim.
And I'm Luke.
And Luke, week 18 is upon us, the final week of the regular season. In just a bit of news, for those of you who may not follow us every week, we are perfect prognosticators of the future. And we completed our perfect season this week by me telling you how Miami was going to throttle Baltimore based on based on it being a trap game, based on how every MVP must win has been performing in their week after becoming the MVP darling. Lamar predictably played terrible, played awful, ruined five touchdowns,
5 more touchdowns than incompletions.
Yeah, which
is always a good thing.
Not
as far
bad.
As I saw a statistic. I'm actually just going to pull it up now because I meant to copy it before we began. But Lamar did some pretty crazy stuff. He had a perfect passer rating and more passing touchdowns than incompletions, right? Which is fairly good.
Sort of a thing.
The last quarterback to do that was Lamar Jackson against the Bengals in 2019. And the last quarterback to do it before then was Lamar Jackson against the Dolphins again in 2019. So not only is he all of the last two players to do that.
That is crazy.
He's also done 2 of them against the same team, which is a bit of a tough pill to swallow if you're a Dolphins fan. Being like, hasn't this happened before? Yes.
Oof. Well, they did put up 70 on Denver earlier in the season. So what are you going to do?
Tough times.
It goes around, comes around.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Well, look, before we dive into today's show, like to remind everybody, check us out on the socials. Check us out on when you're, ignoring work, however you choose to ignore work, and you're on Insta or you're on Twitter or X, or you're on whatever your social media platform of choice is, hit up at Half Yard Line Pod. Check us out. Leave us a comment, rating, review, follow is cool. Check us out on YouTube. You can see our pretty faces. Hello. You can also follow us on your podcast app of choice. That's where this thing started. It's an audio podcast, and we're available on Apple Music, on Spotify, on Amazon Music, on take your pick, Apple Podcast rather, Amazon Music. Take your pick of platform. We are out there for you, and we'd love to hear from you, interact with you guys in that way. But, Luke, we find ourselves in Week 18, and while we are not, dear listener, generally a slave to the NFL schedule, we tend to talk about what we think is interesting from week to week rather than this week's highlights. Starting next week, we expect we'll probably talk about the teams that are in the playoffs. We feel like you probably only care at some level about the teams that are in the playoffs once the playoffs have started. And so given that this is our last opportunity to talk about what we think is cool, we thought it was time to drop in on our favorite franchises here on the Half Yard Line podcast. And that, of course, being the Downtrodden Franchise Index teams, to see how they fared for the 2023 NFL season, now that we have found ourselves in 2024. So,
yes,
Luke, high-level thoughts on the DFI teams this year?
Yeah, I mean, a quick reminder to the folks who maybe weren't there for the start of the season. We pre-selected before the start of this NFL season 10 franchises who we classed as downtrodden to various degrees. Historical failures, looking like they're not going anywhere, several bad years in a row, coaching dysfunction, front office dysfunction, ownership dysfunction. And we picked out 10 of the NFL's least fine, as opposed to finest, to fill out the DFI for this year. Overall, Tim, it's been a pretty impressive group. I mean, as I mentioned, 10 teams. We've got 2 of DFI teams, not arguably, the standout downtrodden franchises in the NFL, which are the Browns and the Lions, both of which are 11-5, have clinched playoff berths. The Lions have won their division. You've got the Colts and Houston, who are both 9-7 and are playing each other this week on Saturday night, which I have a problem with, but that's a conversation for another day. And the winner of that goes into the postseason. And you also have Jacksonville that currently leads the AFC South. And if they beat my bedraggled, beleaguered Titans, which they very much should, they will win the AFC South. So you could have four, Tim. You could have four DFI teams in the playoffs this season, which is a very strong
insanity
hit rate. Now, the good news is where teams rise, other teams, by dint of that, must fall. So the subterranean ranks of the DFI this year, led by Carolina, have delivered us some proper dreck, which is good. You need some to balance it out, right? But I think what's been interesting this year is, I would say, the DFI on the whole has performed fairly well, better than I would probably have expected. And I think some of that can be put down to the overall mediocrity of the NFL. This year, we've spoken about it on a lot of podcasts. This year, it's been abounding in all NFL media circles. It's not been a very good season of NFL football across the board. DFI teams have benefited from that because there are more crappy teams. So therefore, you've got more opportunities to win because you're not playing people who are any good. We're not going to get to this team right now, but just to give you an example, the Colts have won 9 games. They've beaten the Raiders, the Panthers, the Patriots, the Steelers with Mitchell Trubisky, and the Titans twice. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their 9 wins, you could say, probably should win those games. Point being, there's a lot of beatable teams in the NFL this year, so I think that's helped the DFI's cause on the whole. But DFI teams have also overcome things which DFI teams usually would not. Namely, injuries, in some cases, a ridiculous amount of injuries, game-winning comebacks, not throwing things away in comedy fashion, although they've still found a way. So my overall take on the DFI is good for them, and I think this is probably one of the better years that downtrodden franchises in the league are going to have in the near future, I would say. So kudos to them, and a special credit goes to the most downtrodden teams having the least downtrodden seasons, I would say.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we talk about a lot in this space how Cleveland and Detroit are the banner members, right? It'd be very difficult in the world of, pre-2023 football for me to say, the first teams out of the DFI are probably going to be Cleveland and Detroit. And listen, we decide the DFI in the offseason. This is not our who's in the DFI for next year's show. This is a wrap on who was in the DFI for this year's show. But the DFI, Cleveland and Detroit are playing so much better this year than they have historically. Cleveland with a backup quarterback, still in a very DFI way. Yeah.
Well, technically, backup to the backup to the backup, right, is the fourth quarterback they've played this year. Which is
a very Cleveland thing to do. They like to use 150,000 quarterback, not like to, but they do use 150,000 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And they're winning in spite of that, which is the opposite of what you would normally. So it's a very DFI season, but for whatever reason, they're winning instead of losing. And that's why I'm pumping the brakes a little bit on, pulling some of these guys out. Because to your point, it's a little
premature.
Yeah, I guess my point, there are a lot of beatable teams this year. There's a lot of mediocrity. There are a lot of teams in the sort of 7 and 9-ish bucket right now, particularly NFC. But even in the AFC, you got a bunch of teams. Everybody's fighting for that last playoff spot, which means nobody's any good, right? If the 10th or 11th team or 12th team is fighting for the 7th spot.
Yeah. I mean, in the NFC, the Bears are still mathematically alive for the postseason, I think, and they've won.
I believe they were eliminated based on some tiebreaker stuff. They can tie for the 7th spot, but the tiebreakers are no longer possible for them.
But yeah, I mean, an ocean of mediocrity across the NFL, and the DFI teams certainly benefiting, as you say. Tim, we're going to rip through each one of these teams in order. Some will bear more conversation than others, and we're going to go best to worst. So in true downtrodden franchise style, you could start with who's the worst and finish on a high, but that's not the spirit of things. That's not what the Downtrodden Franchise Index is all about. It's about
Carolina fans come back in 45 minutes. We'll be to you.
We are going to finish with the cellar dwellers, but we'll start with the two teams you mentioned, the banner franchises of the Downtrodden Franchise Index, decades upon decades in the wilderness with occasional glimmers of hope, which are very quickly stamped out. We'll start with Cleveland. Cleveland, they're 11-5. We've spoken about the Browns quite a lot on the pod this year, so probably won't spend too long on them. We already touched on the main storyline, of course, being Joe Flacco, who has come out of the clear blue sky to play like Joe Montana. The first half of the Jets game on Thursday night, he played unbelievably. He had almost 300 yards passing in the first half. as the Browns won a cracking DFI bowl against the New York Jets, who are probably the third most downtrodden team in the league. Now, the only thing I wanted to say on the Browns, well, two things I'll say, actually. The Joe Flacco thing, we spoke about it a couple weeks ago and had a good laugh about, could you imagine if Joe Flacco comes back and unseats Deshaun Watson as the starter? Because it's the Browns, on Sunday, I was watching the pregame on CBS, and the insider, Jonathan Jones, said, expect the Browns to be all in on Deshaun Watson in 2024, so Joe Flacco won't come back as the week 1 starter. I thought, of course not. Of course, when something's working and you're a downtrodden team, why would we continue to even try and go with that? We'll just go back to the guy who we're paying all the money to who stinks. I thought that kind of sums up where they're at. So he's apparently not going to retire, so he's going to go somewhere else. Good for Jersey Joe, sticking in there. The second thing I wanted to say in terms of appreciating what the Browns have done, the injury bug has bitten this team pretty hard this year. Obviously, Nick Chubb out for the season, best player on offense, tough. Both starting tackles done for the season, both on IR. The third tackle also on IR. And of course, Deshaun Watson, whatever you make of him, that may have actually been a boon to this team, but he's your QB1 out for the season too. So on paper, you've gone QB1, RB1, LT1, RT1, all on IR, and you are 11-5 and heading for the postseason. So good for the Browns, and those are the kind of two things I wanted to mention. Any thoughts on kind of where the Browns are at, where they're looking going forward?
Yeah, my take on the Browns, Luke, is they did what they needed to do against the teams, that they should probably have beaten largely.
Yep.
They beat your Tennessee Titans, and they are not a member of the DFI, but
and that was with Deshaun
Watson in Nashville.
So can you imagine how bad we were?
Oof. But I would note that they were the only team in the NFL to face 5 or more DFI teams and go undefeated in those games.
You got to start, Tim.
The only team on the DFI to do that. Yes.
Yeah, you got to start by punching sideways, right? You can't punch down yet because you're not good enough, so you have to punch sideways and up. So good. But yeah,
to take advantage of all of your DFI games, right? They beat the Colts, they beat the Cardinals, they beat the Jaguars, they beat the Texans, and they beat the Jets. Like, to take advantage of all your DFI games, that's half their wins, darn near. Coming against futilely terrible franchises for a long time. Now, the Jags were good this year. The Texans were pretty good this year, though they did get them without CJ Stroud. The Colts were okay this year. The Cardinals were, and the Jets were disasters, dumpster fires in their own light. But winning games you ought to win is a big feature, especially for mediocre teams, of being able to make the playoffs. I mean, you look, my Pittsburgh Steelers are the definition of a mediocre team this year, right? They are atrocious when they don't play well. They can squeak in a win when they play particularly well or motivated or whatever the case may be. And we lose to the Cardinals and you lose to the Patriots, and all of a sudden you're praying for unlikely playoff scenarios. Whereas if we win those 2 games, all of a sudden, we're the Browns and we're looking at a 4-seed, 5-seed, or sorry, 5-seed, 6-seed situation.
Right.
And that's the difference. And so credit to the Browns for winning with, a tough injury plagued season against those teams that you ought to beat, which is easier said than done. So that was my first thing. And then, they snuck in there and won a couple that maybe they shouldn't have won. Beating Baltimore is the one that jumps off the paper, right? You go, I'm sorry. And that was during Baltimore's little, I don't know what I am stretch.
Yeah, it's a divisional game. You know each other well. All those cliches and truisms are
scored a bunch of points against a tough defense. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because the defense is really what's carried the Browns this year. I mean, they are 100%. Leading the league in allowing the fewest yards. It's a convoluted way of saying that, but I hope you get my meaning. They're only allowing 266 yards per game. They're only allowing 165 passing yards per game, which is ridiculous.
Insane. This is 2023.
Yeah. 20 points per game, 20.7 points per game as well, which is not, thrilling, but is pretty damn good. If you're around the 20 mark, that's very good. That's usually top 5, top 10 in the league. I think the bottom, is Baltimore, I think at 16, which is crazy good. But, anything around 20 is usually decent. My favorite statistic around the Browns, though, that I found is they've got 27 takeaways this year. 27.
It's a couple.
Right? Mm-hmm. They have a -8 turnover differential.
Yeah. What?
Yep.
Is that a real number?
Yeah. So the Browns are 11-5. The 27 takeaways, which is among tops in the league, but they are -8 in turnovers. They've turned it over 35 times, and they're 11-5. So the defense very much carrying the
creating almost 2 turnovers a game and still losing the turnover battle by a half a turnover a game. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's a wild stat.
So the defense certainly doing the job for the Browns. And as we maybe move away from the Browns, Tim, onto the Lions, we should probably do what we tend to forget to do and actually lay out who the teams in the Downtrodden Franchise Index are before we start talking about it. So
sure,
just
I got
as a
the
recap,
list.
Yeah. Do you want to give us the dirty almost dozen?
Indianapolis Colts, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New York Jets, the Arizona Cardinals, the Detroit Lions, the Washington Commanders, the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina Panthers, the Houston Texans, and our dear friends we just discussed, the Cleveland Browns. I would say we do not rank the DFI teams. We don't say these are the most DFI. We don't have a 1 to 10. This isn't
not
the
a power
bottom
ranking.
10. No, and there's nothing magic about 10. Happened to be 10 this year. It was going to be 9 before I had a passion defense of the Carolina Panthers. If you haven't listened to our DFI special from preseason, it ages well. Go check it out. You can make fun of the things we said that were silly. You can see the things that we said that were prescient. Carolina sneaking in. You didn't think they were quite DFI enough.
Hey,
but
me wrong. In spades.
Listen. To go. First of all, they've my favorite statistic about the Carolina Panthers ever. They've been in the league since 1997. They've never had back-to-back winning seasons ever. They've won a Super Bowl, but back-to-back never. Back-to-back never had back.
They've been to Super Bowl. They've played in two.
Played in 2 Super Bowls. I apologize. That's correct.
Played
Played in 2
Super
Super Bowls.
MVP.
Lost them both. One to the Patriots and one to the
Denver Broncos.
Broncos, yeah.
But
yes,
you are right.
So yes, my point is they've never had back-to-back winning seasons. They finally decided to go all in. They got a new owner, new coach. They go and they get the first overall pick and they use it on the wrong quarterback, which is so DFIE. Yes, so very proud of that pick. But anyhow, that's the 10 teams. We don't rate them. Panthers were kind of last in. Detroit and Cleveland are probably your 2 banner. Have been there the longest. The Jets being a close third. Think about how we think about these teams. But yeah, that's the 10. Luke, the other team that is tearing it up, we talked a little about this in the intro, is the Detroit Lions. Lions robbed, by the way, this weekend.
Scandal. An absolute. We're not going to get into officiating talk because it's kind of dull, and this particular one has been covered to death. But for those that didn't see it, the Lions somehow end up with a chance to win the game against the Cowboys.
No, they won the game. They won the game.
No, but I'm saying they should never even have been in the position, right? The end of game management by Mike McCarthy
was awful,
horrendous, and led to the Lions having the ball with under 2 minutes to go and a chance to win the game. They drive down the field. They had done very little on offense throughout most of that game. Jared Goff had a bad game. Amon-Ra St. Brown scores a touchdown. They run a fun tackle-eligible play for a 2-point conversion to take a 1-point lead and probably almost certainly win the game. Then it was chalked off for the
illegal touching.
Illegal touching, my favorite name of any penalty in the NFL, which is basically because they threw it to a tackle who said he was not an eligible receiver, and it turned out that he actually did, and the ref got confused, and then the refs, as they always do, circle the wagons and say, well, these things happen, but basically the refs completely botched it. That is a very DFI way to lose a game, for sure.
It is, in the DFI. You still step it up for the DFI as they win a living game.
Yeah. I like to think of the DFI as like quicksand or a tar pit. Like you climb it out, and then just one bit sticks on your leg and just pulls you back down. So robbed. The even more downtrodden was that Philadelphia then lost. So had Detroit won the game, they'd be the 2 seed, but actually they're not because they got robbed of a win, literally robbed of a win. Anyway,
and would still have had a shot at the 1 seed.
It would have been alive and kicking, but as it is, not to be the case. Lions nonetheless had a great season, clinched the NFC North for the first time since the NFC North existed. They're top 5 in yards per game on offense, passing yards and rushing yards and points. Last I checked, that's pretty good. Defense has been improved slightly from last year, where it was pretty disastrous, catastrophic. They're not great on defense. They're still kind of in the middle of the lower end of the pack, kind of 10th worst in points per game, allowing 23 per game, which is not great. But the offense has been great and diverse in how it attacks people, which has been fantastic. Ben Johnson will almost certainly be a head coach
Shout out
by
Jahmyr
next
Gibbs.
season. Jahmyr Gibbs been great. Montgomery been fantastic. Sun God done his thing. Laporta's been a guy. The offensive line's been decent. Goff's had some good games, some bad games, but he's overall played well throughout the season.
Good enough. He's done what he needed to do.
The Lions,
not giving the game away.
Not giving the game away. The Lions, a dangerous playoff team, hosting a playoff game for the first time since God knows when. It was probably since, it was still called Constantinople, not Istanbul. And looking forward to some Atmo there in Detroit. Very impressed with the Lions. One of the better teams in the league this year, I would say, on the whole. And yeah, impressive. Not in a position to get out of the DFI yet because of the decades of futility that preceded this, but a team that looks to be built to last. So impressive season, and I think they're in a good spot going forward. I would expect them to be solid again next year, pending, of course, the offensive coordinator situation, which, as we know, can have a huge bearing on how teams fare year to year. My Titans would be a good case in point of this.
As with
great offense. Yeah, great offense where the offensive coordinator leaves doesn't stay a great offense a lot of the time. So maybe pump the brakes on that. But in terms of the roster construction, I think they are built in a very strong way, very youthful across the board, got some young stars, got some solid veterans. I think this is a team that could be good for a couple of years to come.
Yep. No, I think you've nailed it. The difference to me between the Browns and the Lions is that last point. I think the Lions have built their team correctly. They built it from the inside out. The line is good. The defense is getting better. They've got good enough position players. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs was a fantastic pick, and they're using him well, bringing in...
Widely mocked at the time as well, lest we forget, for taking a running back, having got rid of a running back. Well, we got rid of DeAndre Swift, and we're bringing in this other... We got rid of Jamal Williams, and we signed David Montgomery for money, and we drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, 12th overall.
Is Montgomery Gibbs really that much better than Williams and Swift? And the answer appears to be at least as good. And, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to command a crazy contract at some point. So they're going to have to deal with that.
4th round pick too. So that's coming.
Homegrown, low pick. I mean, just done the right way. Whereas you look at the Browns and you go, all right, this team is being held together by a defense that is otherworldly, Super Bowl caliber, one of the best defenses the last 5-6 years, certainly. But how can you continue to pay these edge rushers? Can you continue to keep that defense together when you've got a dead weight at quarterback that's costing you $250 million, $250 million,
and an inescapable contract, not like the Russell Wilson contract where you can take. You can get out of the Deshaun Watson contract if you pay him all of the money on it. That's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. And it's, if they wanted to get away from it, they'd have to do a restructure where they push ad years on the end and spread the cap hit over a long time.
There's
and do
always
a big
way, but
payout.
It's still,
it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And he's going to have to get his full $250 million. And when you look at that versus where they're sitting in Detroit. Now, Detroit's other issue is Jared Goff isn't, 15, right? He's getting older. And you do wonder how long he's got it. He's not been as good this year in my mind as he was last year. Can they keep it together? And as long as their situation is not dependent on a prolific star quarterback, like he's kind of got the same feel for me right now as Kirk Cousins.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Yeah.
He's not blowing you away, but he's doing enough. The team's winning when he's playing. The team's probably not winning if he's not playing. So can you keep that quality of quarterback play around for the intermediate to long term? If they can, I think they're in a much better situation to be good longer, to maybe find their way to climb that ladder out of the DFI pit from what is certainly one of the lower rungs. Certainly moving up, to your point, I'm not ready to take them out. You don't wipe literally decade. This team has not won the playoff game since 89, 91, something. I mean, it's forever.
It was 19. I think it was 1993 because it was the last time they won the division. I think they won a playoff game that year, but it's early 90s for sure.
Unbelievable. But I mean, so decades of futility does not get wiped off by. But the other thing that they're doing that Cleveland's not doing is getting progressively better. Cleveland was a disaster last year. They've been good this year. Cleveland was a disaster 2 years ago. It's what made them bring in Watson. Baker was, they ran Baker out of time. I mean, like they've not done the thing. Detroit brought in a mentally unstable but relatively successful head coach. I don't know if you saw his presser. He's like, "Well, would you be frustrated?" I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
Dan,
intense
whoa.
guy.
Yeah. Bites kneecaps, I think, was one of his other quotes. We're a kneecap biting team.
We'll bite your kneecaps. That was his introductory presser, I think, as the coach.
So, interesting character, maybe is the right way to say it. But he's getting it done for him at the same time. And so that's very different in my mind than Cleveland, which has certainly overperformed this year what you would have expected given their situation. And you got to give them their platitudes for that. But not, as in my mind, set up to be as good for as long, notwithstanding, obviously, what is a fantastic defense. I think that's enough on the top teams. I mean, at the end of the day, these are teams we're going to keep talking about, right? They're in the playoffs. So
clinched.
We will see them next week. But as we move down the quality ladder from the 11-5 teams, we come to a couple of teams, 3 teams by my count, sitting at that 9-7 sort of mark.
Mm-hmm.
And they all reside in the same division, interestingly enough. This is another one of those, by the way, of beating the teams, controlling your own destiny. Sort of.
Yeah.
If you get to play the AFC South 6 times, you ought to win some games. And that is the AFC South leading Jacksonville Jaguars and playoff contending Texans and Colts. Luke, I'll go to you. Pick your favorite flavor of the AFC South, and let's take them as a group.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you certainly make the right point. The AFC South is not particularly strong. I mean, these teams, all 3 of them could potentially win this division, and I'm not sure any of them is particularly good. It does help that, as you say, the 4th team in this division is the Titans, who have gone over in divisional games, lost all 5, probably going to lose all 6. So that will help the old win totals. If you add 2 to all of these, they're all going to sweep the Titans if the Jags beat them on Sunday, which they're
not
will.
going to do, because you're going to get my Steelers a playoff berth.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I was going to say kind of where I feel the most bullish or the most positive going into future years, right? On paper, you would probably say the Jags, right? You would probably say the Jags.
Would you?
Because
Texans?
Probably.
Texans.
Yeah. No, I'm saying, but this is my point. On paper, you'd probably say Jags. You say, hey, Trevor Lawrence down, but they've added a lot of pieces around him. You look player for player, like there's people, right? You got Evan Ingram, and you got Ridley and Christian Kirk and ETN and Oluokun and Rayshon Jenkins and Josh Allen. Like there's plenty of talent in the toy chest, if you will, down there in Jacksonville. I would say Houston as well. And the reason I would say it is obviously you have the quarterback in place. CJ Stroud has blown everyone away with how brilliant he's played this year. Looks like a 10-year veteran, makes every throw, fantastic, inspiring kind of leader from the looks of things, despite his low, whatever it was, S score or whatever that thing was pre-draft, where everyone tried to shit all over him for, which no one knew anything about before or since. They also have a pretty nice situation going into next year because they have the 3rd most cap space in the league next season, behind only, I think, Washington and the Titans. They've got the quarterback in place. DeMeco Ryans looks to be a dude as a head coach. Bobby Slowick, the OC, who came over from the Shanahan tree, has done a fantastic job. Another guy who will get head coaching interest, but maybe you can hang on to him for one more year. And the difference between, I would say, Houston and Jacksonville and the Colts, take them one by one. Jacksonville, I think you said it on a pod earlier this season. I'm not sure how much better the Jags are going to get from where they are at right now. The only way to make a meaningful step change would be Trevor Lawrence to become Justin Herbert, right? Or Joe Burrow or Mahomes or Lamar or one of these top QBs, which this has had, and he has had a down year despite the talent around him, a very down year, and has had injuries, obviously, which doesn't help, but still not played that great when he's been in the games. The Colts, 9-7, made it happen, gutsy, working out wins, but they don't have the quarterback solidified because Anthony Richardson is going to be the starter next year, and you don't really know what he is. You played most of the season without him. Gardner Minshew is fine, but he's Gardner Minshew. Like, he's not going to start for you beyond this season unless Richardson gets injured again. So you don't have a huge amount to hang your hat on. Houston, if you go, I think the head coach is a dude. I think the quarterback is a dude. And you've got a couple other pieces around, like Nico Collins has come forward. Will Anderson has looked very good when he's been playing. There's people, right? It's not a superstar group, but they've been able to get to 9 wins despite not having an overwhelming amount of talent. That to me is more positive than a team like the Jags, who say we have a lot of talent on paper, but we can still only get to 9 wins even with all of that. So of the 3 teams, I'd be the most bullish on the Texans going into next year. As far as this season, I would expect the Jags to win the division, and I would expect Houston to beat the Colts, but it will be a close game. I think regardless of what happens, if I was a fan of one of these teams and wanted to be the most positive, it would for sure be the Texans.
No doubt. And listen, I don't think we need to spend a ton of more column inches, as you will, on the AFC South. It's a terrible division. They've largely beat each other up. Jacksonville was one of these teams that had they went on a run. And they went on a run beating the Atlanta Falcons. They won in Buffalo, which is an impressive win on paper, but this is when Buffalo was doing the boring, we don't want to play football business. They beat the Colts, the Saints, my Steelers. They lost to San Francisco, but then beat Tennessee and Houston. So beating the teams in their division. Jacksonville went 5-1, by the way, against the DFI this year, which is certainly going to pad your stats when you only have 9 wins. So more than half their wins came against the DFI. Only one loss to a DFI team, that being the Browns. The last 5 games, they have lost 4 of them, beating only the Carolina Panthers. So a team that had every opportunity to really, talking about the Steelers, same thing, right? We had a chance. You were sitting there 5 weeks ago going, well, they're a lock for the playoffs. Jacksonville, you were thinking, I mean, people were talking, I wasn't thinking, people were talking first round or first overall seed.
Yeah.
And you just go, now you're thinking, I don't know, maybe they don't make the playoffs. So just atrocious fall from grace at the end here. They beat a bunch of teams in the middle of the year, went on a run, which I think changed their narrative in a way, almost like Denver tried to, right? If Denver had done anything other than start the year 1-5, that little thing in the middle, Denver might have been Jacksonville this year. But very similar teams, in my opinion. Lawrence has been exceptional at times and very, very average at times. I think they need to surround him with a different strategy, right? He is not going to be the Peyton Manning stand back there and kind of run the team quarterback. He needs a little more structure around him. And they don't have the assets or the, in my opinion, organizational quality to go do that. So I'm with you. I don't think Jacksonville's that team. And Indy and Houston are both heavily quarterback dependent right now. You know, Indy, interestingly enough, has come on late without their star quarterback in a very non-DFI way to do things. But again, they went on a streak where they beat, are you ready for this? After starting 3-5, they beat Carolina, New England, Tampa, Tennessee, and the Steelers, and the Raiders. And losing to the Bengals minus Joe Burrow and the Falcons with whoever plays there now. So not beating teams that make you go, oh.
Yeah, there's not like a stand up and take notice. Wow, you beat the
Niners,
the Ravens or something. Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head. I think the quarterback dependent, and the difference between these 3 teams, the Jags have spent the money already, so they've tried the rookie.
And this is as good as it gets, right? They're at the peak of the cycle, right?
Whereas the Colts and the Texans are on the upswing. Where Houston 3rd most cap space in the league next year, Colts 5th most. Both quarterbacks on rookie deals. The difference being Houston knows that CJ Stroud is going to be QB1 looking like for a long time. So all eyes on Anthony Richardson going into 2024.
All I have to say about this next team, Luke, is Atlanta. How in the hell have they won 7 games?
I know. This is my number one thought.
What?
I was like, Atlanta is still alive for the postseason. Atlanta is the next on the DFI list in terms of highest up. And this is really the start of the severe downslope in terms of team quality. I feel like I said this on a podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm going to stick to it. I think Atlanta is the most widely hated team in the entire NFL by everyone.
Certainly hate the head coach. Yeah.
Everyone hates Arthur Smith for his condescending press conferences where he talks about, well, it's not fantasy football, blah, blah, blah. I would say to him, and he is a former Titans offensive coordinator, was very good for us, but I would just say, if you are coaching a team whose offense includes, 3 top 10 selections at skill positions, in Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts, all of whom have shown at least a solid season of production at some point. Kyle Pitts' first year, he was fantastic. Drake London had 1,000 yards last year. Bijan is approaching 1,000 yards this year, despite limited opportunities. And you have only scored more points per game than the Patriots, the Panthers, the Giants, the Jets, the Titans, and the Steelers. And you're an offensive coach.
It's not good.
It's not going to land well. Went into the season with Desmond Ridder. Everyone said, don't really see how this is going to pan out. He's been up and down. Heineke started and threw 5 completions out of like 40 attempts at the weekend and was terrible. I don't know how they've won 7 games. Help again. We talked about the AFC South. Playing the NFC South helps. The NFC South is a complete wash of bad teams, with maybe Tampa might be okay, but then they lose to the Saints. It's a complete mess. No one's any good. The offensive misuse of talent, already touched on it, but I'll just give you a couple of little stats, Tim, that just sort of sums up how I feel about Atlanta and how most people do, right?
Yeah.
So Bijan Robinson, 948 yards rushing on 203 carries, right? It's pretty good. It's
per carry, yeah. Not enough carries.
Yeah. 4.7 yards per carry on the 203 carries. So, of course, what do? We give Tyler Algier 180 carries when he's averaging 3.7 yards a carry. Mm-hmm. Now, I play...
Equal distribution, Luke. Distribution.
I play fantasy football. I have done for a long time. I can tell you that 4.7 yards per carry versus 3.7 yards per carry is good. So despite playing fantasy football, actually you have a vague understanding of how statistics even out over the course of the season.
Yep.
Bijan's also been benched for fumbling once, which, okay, sometimes teams do that, but it's a bit old hat, like Belichick.
I'd say it's a very Belichick thing, yeah.
Drake London, great year last year. Unless he gets 136 receiving yards next week, he won't get to 1,000 yards this year, which used to be an achievement, 1,000 yards. Now everyone does it, so that's not great. Jonnu Smith has 4 fewer receptions than Kyle Pitts.
Yikes.
They're picking 9th right now. To your point, 7 and 9 is good for 9th, which speaks to how many teams are kind of in the same bucket. They don't have a quarterback on the roster who's any good. They're not going to have a quarterback on the roster who's any good unless, maybe they trade up, or some guy drops out of the top 5, or they go out in the veteran market and sign someone. Russell Wilson is a name floated. I feel like this is just a team and a fan base.
A very DFI thing to do.
Yeah. I feel like this is a team and a fan base that's kind of waiting for the axe to fall so they can move on to the next coach and the next kind of era, if you will. A very boring team, a team that not many people have enjoyed watching or seeing kind of comments from the head coach either. Atlanta is not good, and the record is deceptive, and they should be a lot worse than they are, but they've benefited from a poor league, and going forward, they really need surgery in the coaching ranks. I would suggest is probably the number one thing that the team and the fan base is looking forward to for next year and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, here are the teams that Atlanta has beaten this year. The Colts, okay, the Jets, the Saints, the Buccaneers, the Texans, no CJ Stroud, Green Bay, and Carolina. Now, Green Bay
lost to Carolina as well. They're one of the only two teams to have lost to Carolina.
So that's Green Bay, their own division, Houston without CJ Stroud, and the Jets. Okay, fine. They tied for the league lead in games against the DFI teams. They had 7.
It's 7. Wow.
None of those 7 were against Cleveland. They did play Detroit and got beat. But otherwise, they're playing the teams in the DFI that are more DFI-y, and they still only managed to go 3-4. So 7 games against, what we'll call beatable teams. They only went 3-4, but that's set up their 7-9 record overall, similar against the DFI as they are against the rest of the league. They did have the privilege of playing the AFC South, which has helped bolster many teams' records.
Played the 2 worst divisions in football, their own division and the AFC South, which has been probably the second worst in terms of...
And you added up to 7 wins. Yep.
Forget the records, they're not good teams, right? They're beatable teams. Everyone in the division is beatable. There's no Bills, there's no Chiefs.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, look, that's how the numbers add up to the numbers, and we're not going to take away the numbers. They are what they are. But it's just not good. It's just not good. And Atlanta's not going to get better. Their owner has not demonstrated the ability to build and keep a functioning franchise. The general manager has made many questionable decisions regarding draft pick allocation. How a team, listen, Bijan has been good. Algier was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. It was about the only thing they had on that team that was working. They've used a first-round pick on Bijan. They used a first-round pick on Pitts. Pitts was a very high draft pick. Bijan went, I think, 8th. which is crazy for a running back. And you're just looking at the list and going, fine, that's what you're going to hang your hat on. At least do something with it. They haven't found a quarterback. They've been through a bunch of them. I mean, it's a disaster of a franchise that is not that far away removed from having played in the Super Bowl and really just imploded thereafter. There's no stability. Enough.
Well, I do think it's a weird, fun. Yeah, one last thing on the Falcons because they're desperately dull. Fun sliding doors thought. Who was the offensive coordinator for the Falcons when they made the Super Bowl?
Steve Sarkisian.
It was Kyle Shanahan.
Oh, Kyle Shanahan.
So imagine there's an alternate universe.
Steve Sarkisian
out there
after Kyle Shanahan.
in the multiverse, right? In the NFL multiverse, you've got Kyle Shanahan coaching the Falcons. So just a fun thing to say. You see how the fortunes change. It's not if the Niners don't hire him away and the Falcons say, hey, you know what, this is the guy. Who knows where we're at right now? But Atlanta certainly has bored the pants off the entire league. So we're going to
promote your own guys before someone else does.
Onto much more amusing disasters and the New York Jets. Tim, 6-10. You were at their first game of the season.
I was.
You were at the dawning of a new age at the Meadowlands as Aaron Rodgers
runs in with the American
Hall
flag.
Of Fame, comes out on the anniversary of 9/11. The anthem is played. There's emotion. It's a new age for Fireman Ed and the Jets faithful. 4 snaps later, Rodgers tears his Achilles tendon, and it's basically been a complete nightmare ever since.
So wait, hang on, Luke. Since he tore his ACL, clearly, not ACL, Achilles. Sorry, Achilles. Clearly, that was the last we heard of Aaron Rodgers. He's a non-story.
He's been very quiet.
He's very quiet. How you want to talk about DFI teams? This is and I would like the New York Jets to turn their attention to the Browns, to the Colts, to the number of teams who are playoff bound or near playoff bound with their backup quarterbacks.
It's true.
Just have a look.
Also, several of whom have actually played for the Jets in the last couple of years.
Exactly. And you look around, you go, for these teams who think they're a quarterback away, go look at all the teams who lose their quarterback and keep playing. That's the team that's a quarterback away. Not the team that when the quarterback goes away, you blow it up and you go 6-10. And listen, I predict them to go 4 wins with Aaron Rodgers. So they were better than I thought they would be. They've won some games that have made you go, what? But they've also lost some games that make you go, what? And they've got nothing at the quarterback position. They've been back and forth with who they're going to play. They're playing guys for the wrong reasons and worried about contracts and injuries and tradability and blah. They're another of disaster.
Well, exactly to your point, if you look at the Browns, right, as a comparator, if that's a word, comparison to the Jets, right, both elite Downtrodden franchises, both of whom have poured money into big name quarterback, right? Both of whom have lost said quarterback for the season. Now, the Jets was earlier than the Browns, so we'll give them that, pause. Both of them have played 4 quarterbacks this year. The Browns have played 4. The 4th one has led them to wins and excitement and yards and the postseason. The Jets have played 4 quarterbacks. One of them played 4 snaps, so we can give him a bye, right? The other 3 have been terrible.
Each have 2 wins, yeah.
They're all terrible, and everyone knew they were terrible before this season even began. So to your point, you talk about roster construction, and we spoke a lot about how the Jets were a quarterback away, and lots of people did, right? You've got Garrett Wilson, you've got Breece Hall, obviously back from the injury, you've drafted offensive linemen, you've got a defense full of names that people know and like and rate. Defensive Rookie of the Year in Sauce Gardner and Quinn and Williams and Quincy Williams and Jordan Whitehead and all these players. And yet, you take one piece away, and okay, it's the most important piece on any team is the quarterback. That's fair. To collapse, and it is a collapse, to win 6 games with the quality of roster compared to the Browns, who have won 11, is bad in a year which the Patriots have been terrible. The Bills have been very up and down, and they beat the Bills in that game where Aaron Rodgers got injured anyway. It's not exactly a recipe for success. They've come out and said, Joe Douglas, the GM, Robert Saleh will be back next year. So I just put hold on to your butts, quoting Jurassic Park, for what's going to happen at the Meadowlands next year. My favorite thing that the Jets have done this year by far, which again, we talked about the Lions losing on being hosed on a 2-point play that they didn't actually do anything wrong on, as a great DFI example. The Jets eclipsing that, I would say the most downtrodden franchise thing that's happened this year is the Jets clearing a roster spot for Aaron Rodgers who is not going to play football this year, so they have 52 instead of 53 guys every week, is just representative of how you mismanage a team. For those that didn't follow that, they reopened Aaron Rodgers' practice window because whatever miracle cure he takes has healed his Achilles and he's going to come back and play. They opened his practice window. At the close of that, they have to put him on the active roster. In order to do that, they had to cut someone else. And sure, it's a backup, whatever, but you're cutting a player and you are having a roster spot filled by someone who is not going to play. The only reason you've done it is to salve his ego, to make it seem like he was going to play, which he never was. And I thought, you know what? That just sums the whole thing up. It's been a circus. It's stayed a circus. And it's going to stay a circus. And unless they win, 12 games next year, they are all going to get sent out on a rail from the New Jersey area. And hard to say you can feel sorry for them when it's been so poorly managed. Top to bottom. That really is the story of the Jets to me, more than the on-field stuff we can talk about till the cows come home. But it's the off-field circus has made them such a downtrodden franchise this season. Not been great if you're a Jets fan from such high hopes at the start.
No, and I mean, listen, Aaron Rodgers played 4 snaps and has managed to be the center of the attention of the universe of the New York Jets media and fan base for the whole season. He came out immediately after tearing his Achilles and saying, I don't know that I can't play this year. I maybe could play this year. And then you're hearing from unnamed sources who are all related to Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers.
That, he's healing faster than any player has ever healed. He's 55,000 years old. He's not healing faster than everybody else. He can walk around on the side. I actually was at the Giants game yesterday. And watching the Giants game yesterday, I'm looking at Danny Dimes on the sideline. And you look at him and you go, he looks like he could play. He's throwing a ball around, takes a couple steps back, throws the ball, takes a couple steps forward, throws the ball. You can move around post-injury with no pads on, with no one coming after you, and look like you can play football. Aaron Rodgers can get cleared to practice even though there's 0 probability he was ever going to go suit up. And then he makes this big media spectacle out of it. The team is doing, by the way, exactly what he wants them to do because they need him to come back next year and be happy. And this season's sold. And then to come out and say, no, the team put me on the active roster against my will. I didn't want to be put on the active roster. No, not at the expense of cutting somebody else. That would be terrible. It's nonsense. So you make the team do this. And then you go out and throw the team under the bus for having done it. And ladies and gentlemen, it is part of the cost of having Aaron Rodgers on your football team. He is a narcissist. He wants to be the center of attention all the time. He is angry with the world that he got hurt, and he's taking it out on the Jets. And if I were the Jets, I would say, wow, that was an experiment. Poor Aaron got hurt, didn't work out real well for us. Really hate it for him. We're going to lick our wounds, take the financial hit, and wish Mr. Rodgers the best in his future endeavors.
Interesting.
They're not going to do that. They're going to play him. But the blah, 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 Jets, Aaron Rodgers, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I would just say to point, Tim, before we close on the Jets, is you talked about Giants, right? The other team plays in the same stadium. Their quarterback goes down for the season too. It's been a season of this, right? And listen, is Tommy DeVito the answer long term? No, but he comes in. Hey, he plays some kind of semi-thrilling football, makes a couple plays, you win a couple of games. You put Tyrod Taylor in. He played this weekend. He played pretty well in the main, and he missed a layup to Saquon that would have actually put them in the lead in that game, a 2-point conversion that they should have
won the game. Yep.
Should have won the game. And then they missed a field goal at the end of the game, so they should have won it probably twice.
At least.
They didn't. I mean, it's not their year. Season's lost. But again, you can find guys who can play football. The Jets have never, well, not never, but certainly not in the recent past, been able to find anyone who can even play like remotely well for more than 1 week at a time. Mike White had a couple of games, right? Then he's back on the bench. Zach Wilson has had more chances to play quarterback for a team than he had any right to. No offense to the guy, but he's just not good at playing quarterback, and they just roll him out there over and over and over again. They can't seem to find another guy off the street. They can't find a Josh Dobbs to give them 2-3 weeks of like fun, gamey wins, or Joe Flacco, who obviously played for them. It's just bizarre to me that you can have such an organizational blind spot, not for quarterback, but for backup quarterback. That's just really weird. Now, obviously, you don't want to have to keep playing them, but they've just continually failed to evaluate, scout, and sign that position. And it's obviously been really important because both of the last 2 seasons, if they'd had league average quarterback play, they probably would have made the postseason. So tough times for the Jets, and they're going to stay ensconced in the DFI, certainly going into next year. Another team that's going to remain, Tim, but on maybe a brighter note, is a team with fewer wins, which is the Arizona Cardinals, a team which everyone and their wife and husband said is going to struggle to win a single game this year. 0 talent across the roster, they said. Kyler Murray is injured. Team is kind of in the doldrums, going nowhere. To me, a perfect year for Arizona. They're 4-12, which is obviously not great, but they have been feisty. They just beat the Eagles, which was hilarious, in a game Philly. Which they in Philadelphia, a game they have 0 need to win. There is no organizational desire to win that game. The players are just playing football for the fun of playing football on Sundays. It means nothing.
Yep.
Guys playing for jobs, sure. The most notable wide receiver on the team is Hollywood Brown. He didn't even play in this game. Kyler Murray comes back, plays well. James Conner's had a really good year again on the quiet because, the Cardinals aren't winning. They've been feisty. Kyler's played okay and looked like he can be the quarterback if he can stay healthy. And they're picking 3rd if the season ended today. A great season for Arizona. If you're going to lose games, this is how you want it to happen because the team was going nowhere anyway. So Arizona, tough year. Certainly a rebuild year that everyone thought it would be. But I think is pretty much as good as they could have hoped for if you're a fan of that team. Watching games this season, you've not just laid over and died. You've actually shown some spirit. You've won a couple of surprising games, shown some fight. And going into next year, you have reasons for optimism in that the quarterback seems to be back and playing well. The coach seems to be able to motivate this team. And they're picking 3rd overall, which certainly does not hurt, especially if you're not drafting a quarterback because you can trade that pick for a bevy.
Or maybe they should draft a quarterback.
Maybe they could draft a quarterback. Options are out there.
Trade Kyler. Somebody would take him. I don't think he's going to be the guy.
Well, the point is you have options on the table, right? If they're picking 10th, you go, well, we're kind of screwed either way. If you're picking 1st, you go, organization needs to completely be flushed down the toilet. Whereas
it is
this way,
crazy
you might have a path forward.
By the way, that 4-12 is picking 3rd and 7-9 is picking 9th. It's just like, what happened? Everybody is, it's crazy. Everybody has 7 wins. But listen, the Arizona Cardinals.
I think the Jets are the only team in the league that's won 6 games, which is weird. Usually you'd have a lot more than that. But yes,
I think that's right. I was quickly scrolling. I think that's correct. The 4-12 Arizona Cardinals, which I think you covered well. I'm going to go all the way to the opposite end of the alphabet. Arizona Cardinals are alphabetically first in the NFL. The Washington Commanders are alphabetically last in the NFL. Also, sitting at 4-12, a team that had a little more promise than Arizona coming into the year. Not lots, but a little. I actually picked the Commanders to overperform this year and win the division. So
have a surprise. There's always a team out there, right, that does it.
You got to pick one, and you rarely get the right one. It wasn't them. No, it wasn't. We were both high on the Bears and the Well, I was high on the Commanders, and that was a disaster. But mostly, and I feel like this happens to the Commanders every year. They are the opposite at the beginning of the year what they are at the end of the year. And so most of the time they're terrible at the beginning of the year, and then when the pressure's off, they win 4 or 5 games at the end of the year to ruin their draft choice. This year they're kind of doing the opposite. They started the year 2-0, beat Arizona, beat Denver. Both of those are terrible football teams. Kind of got a reckoning, had to play Buffalo and Philly in back-to-back weeks. That's a tough go. Lost both of those, and then kind of played middling football. They lost to the Bears. They beat Atlanta. They lost to the Giants. They lost to Philly. They beat New England. And since then have gone 7 straight losses, locking up a solid draft choice for our dear friends in Washington, finishing the year at Dallas coming to DC. Dallas having just, should have lost last night or the other night to Detroit. You would expect that the Dallas will beat them, and finishing the season on 8 losses is just...
Well, it's exactly what the Titans did last year, so I can tell you it doesn't feel great.
No, it doesn't. And not look, by the time this team was, 4-5, it wasn't like you thought they were going to take over the world, but you're in playoff positioning at 4-5. You got a chance. You got to win some games. They had a game against Seattle coming up. They had a game against New York coming up. They had, there were some beatable teams in there. They also had to play Dallas and Miami, and that's part of it. You steal one of those wins and you beat the teams you can beat, and you're a playoff team, but instead you lose the last 8. And you're going to get another high draft pick. And, the Commanders will almost certainly be using it on a quarterback after the Sam Howell experiment has not worked out. And maybe they'll find their Patrick Mahomes. But to me, this is a team that is broken from the inside out. The offensive line needs work. The defensive line needs work. They traded away their 2 best defensive players in the middle of the season. They are ostensibly all in on the rebuild. Got a new owner. One wonders if they'll have a new coach and a new GM come the new year. And then they will have a bevy, at least, of draft assets to use to try to make the team better. But I don't know, Luke, if you have any thoughts on the Commanders.
No, I mean, certainly no good thoughts. New coach, I think, is almost a lock, right? A new owner comes in and it's not their coach.
That's right.
That's what tends to happen most of the time. And in order to have that not happen, you need to win a lot of games. They've won 4. They're probably going to finish the season winning 4. The other thing that Ron Rivera did, and we spoke about it in a previous pod earlier in the season, is he hired Eric Bieniemy to be the offensive coordinator. Eric Bieniemy got a lot of head coaching interest. It's an offense-driven league. Is Eric Bieniemy just going to make the jump 1 seat up? Could well be the case. Sam Howell, let's not forget, as earlier in the year, was leading the NFL in passing yards. But yeah, to your point, he's fallen off a cliff. I mean, that Seattle game that you mentioned that they ended up losing that 29-26. It was week 10, right? You're still in the mix. Yep. Sam Howell in that game threw for 312 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Would have gotten back to 500. Hey, yeah.
Right. You think, hey, kid's playing well. He's had some not so great games, but he's had some very impressive games. I think the Denver game as well was another one I watched of his where he played really well, made some great throws. And I thought, oh, this guy's got something. Since that week, 10, lost to Seattle. He's thrown 3 touchdowns and 10 interceptions and has been benched for Jacoby Brissett. So it's a steep fall from grace for old Sam. Tough times. But the real reason that this team has stunk the joint out is the defense. Worst defense in the NFL in both yards and points per game allowed. 30 points per game allowed this team. 30. I don't care how good your offense is. That ain't it. That ain't getting the job done. Fired Jack Del Rio during the season has made next to no difference. And as you say, reasons for optimism for this team would be you're picking second. They have the most cap space in the NFL coming up in the 2024 season as it's projected today. And yeah, new coach, new QB, full page turn in the DC area, see what the new owners have to say. But yeah, the Mandos have had a stinker in the first year post Snyder, but they hope to be on the up.
They're going to have a high pick. Hang on, they're going to have a high pick. They got extra 2. They got an extra 3 from the Chase Young and
and they've got pieces to replace trades. Because they've lost
and a ton of money to spend. So a coach is going to be able to come in, and to your saying, maybe it's Bieniemy, but a coach and a GM are going to be able to come in and have the opportunity to recast this team to be almost whatever they want it to be. They don't have, like, if you look at their salary cap and not just the total dollars, but if you look at the players, like, they don't have going into 2024 that terrible contract that they're just going to have to eat. Their biggest cap hit next year is Terry McLaurin. I got no problem with Terry McLaurin. Their next biggest cap hit next year is Daron Payne. I got no problem with Daron Payne. Jonathan Allen, older, but still playing well. And then everybody else is under $10 million, except your left tackle, who, maybe you want to move on from him, but he doesn't have all that much guaranteed money. You can cut him and save half his contract. So you're looking at an opportunity to come in and say, we can remake this team. They've got pieces. Logan Thomas is a solid tight end. Terry McLaurin, solid wide receiver. A couple of defensive linemen are still, and again, they need to get younger there, but still performing well. Jamin Davis has been playing. I mean, they've got pieces in place. Hopefully they can sort of construct something. I don't know. It's an interesting job in that I feel like a new regime there that knows what they're doing could almost do a San Francisco. You think about the team that the current administration took over in San Francisco was a problem team when they replaced their head coach and GM the last go round, and have built a juggernaut over a very short period of time. because they had a plethora of assets and a plethora of cap space, and they spent it well. They've drafted well in the middle of rounds. They've done good at trades. They brought in good free agents. They've spent draft picks well. And if you can do all of those things, you can turn a team around around quickly. So that's enough. I didn't mean to keep us there on the Commanders, but the team that squeaked in to the DFI, and I am so glad they did. The Carolina Panthers traded a absolute fortune, king's ransom, for the ability to take their quarterback, the one they wanted. No one else getting my way. I'm going to get my guy. And by all accounts, they got the wrong guy.
I mean, I think this might be up there with the most downtrodden acquisitions or, single pieces of NFL business that have been done in the last 10 years. Is it worse than
Sam Bradford, the trade for Sam Bradford?
It's pretty bad. I mean, you had you traded up for the first pick.
Yep.
You made the pick. Then you have the first overall pick the year after, but you don't have that pick because you traded away the pick for the first overall pick the year before. Yeah. It's just a comedy of errors. Carolina taking Bryce Young. Bryce Young in 15 games this year, 2,700 yards, 11 touchdowns, 10 picks, and he's fumbled 10 times. Not
19 turnovers to 10 touchdowns, not what you're looking for.
Not what you're looking for.
No,
the only thing I'll say,
they don't have anything else. It wasn't like they had this regular team ready to go.
Right. There are two things I was going to say on Bryce Young, because obviously this is the crux of the whole Carolina thing. We'll get onto one other thing I had in a second. But Bryce Young's going to be the quarterback next year. Right. That's a lock. That's 100% happening. Yep. He has had startlingly little around him. If you look at talent, right? If you think of line, you think of skill position players. I know CJ Stroud has had a great year, and that's cast it into strong relief, right? A guy who hasn't had elite talent around him, but has made it work, and Bryce Young hasn't. So that's always going to be the comparison. Guys like this are tied at the hip. It was the same with Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, or Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf. Like it always happened. Eli Manning, and Phillip Rivers. These things always happen. He has, on the brighter side, Tim, accounted for both of their wins with fourth quarter comebacks this season, and he led them to 30 points against the Packers. The defense ballsed it up and they lost the game. But against the Packers, he had 312 yards and 2 touchdowns. His best game of the season by a long way. Yep. So if you are trying to look glass half full at a downtrodden team like the Panthers, who going into next year look to have almost no method of getting that much significantly better, you would say maybe those are the Bryce Young moments that we can build upon, right? Forget the, turning the ball over and getting hit a lot and all the rest of it. And you can put it down to, we put a young kid under center on a shit football team. And guess what? He didn't turn them into the 70s Pittsburgh Steelers. Big whoop. No surprise. Rookie quarterbacks struggle. Peyton Manning threw 1 million interceptions. Matt Stafford threw 1 million interceptions. There are many examples of this. So too early to say he's definitely not going to be the guy. Obviously, the eye test has not been kind to Bryce Young. Neither has the box score. But he has had flashes. And if you're a Panthers fan looking for reasons to be optimistic, that's probably what you will base it on, right? Is he's had these moments where he's shown the ability to lead the team forward, bring them back from deficits, put them in positions. Now, obviously, when you've got such a little amount of talent on your team, it's hard to get in the position to win the game at all. And on the defensive side, a really strange dichotomy of a year for Carolina. They've allowed the third fewest yards per game in the NFL, and they're the third best passing defense by yards per game in the entire league, but they're allowing the third most points, which is a really strange combination of things. The main reason for this,
the fewest
takeaways, and the fewest takeaways in football. They have the fewest takeaways too. They have 11, which is the fewest in the NFL. The Titans have 12, a second worst. So Carolina has not been able to get the ball back for Bryce Young and put him in short field, advantageous situations to overcome some of those rookie growing pains you're going to have. We spoke about the Browns have turned it over 1 trillion times, but they've got the ball back so often they've been able to net off some of those problems. The Panthers have turned it over quite a fair amount and they haven't been able to get the ball back. Very, very difficult position for them. Capped off by this beating by the Jags with CJ Beathard. It's not even Trevor Lawrence. They lost 26-0 at the weekend. They had 7 first downs in the entire game. They were 1 for 13 on third down. Not what you're looking for.
Nope.
And the capper of the capper of the capper, we've spoken about what's the most downtrodden thing to happen in the NFL this year. I think your owner throwing a drink over opposing fans probably takes the biscuit. I'm sure people have seen this. David Tepper enraged in his box, as he has a right to be as the owner of a team which is stinking the joint out. However, throwing your drink at opposing fans, not a recipe for widespread praise in the NFL ownership or fan community. Reminded me a lot of when Bud Adams, erstwhile Titans owner, threw middle fingers up at opposing fans once, but he was like 90, so everyone said, he's an old man. It's fine.
Yeah, he was a bit of a mess.
So yeah, David Tepper throwing his drink over the Jags fans, not a great look. No. Doesn't exactly make you look like an appealing place to go and coach either, because they need a coach too. So what are your thoughts on the Panthers? I've given a kind of treatise there, but they stink. They're going to stay terrible. It's really hard to claw and scratch and find ways to think, well, this team might be good next year. It just doesn't look like
well, listen, they're going to be good next year because they were terrible this year, and this is what this team does, is they go back and forth. But I don't know. I think you brought up the Tepper thing, and I think, frankly, that to me is the biggest red flag. We are entering an era of NFL football. Look, we've always talked about NFL owners as billionaires, and they have become billionaires. Jerry Jones, if he was a billionaire, it was barely when he bought the Dallas Cowboys. The era of billionaires becoming NFL owners instead of NFL owners becoming billionaires is upon us. And there are lots of different kinds of billionaires in the world. There are wonderful people who happen to have $1 billion. They have been fortunate. They have been successful business people. They created things. But the hedge fund billionaire like David Tepper is, and it's not fair to categorize. I'm sure there are very nice hedge fund owners out there. But to be very good at managing assets like they do in the hedge fund business or in the venture capital business, you are going out there and you are buying things from people strictly because you believe them to be worth less than they're willing to sell, more than they're willing to sell them to you for, or selling them to people who are willing to pay you more than you think they're worth. The entire business is going out there and trying to get one over on people and doing so regularly. And listen, I work in finance myself. I am not throwing everyone who works in finance under the bus. I am saying that there are an awful lot of people who succeed in that particular industry who aren't the nicest people on earth.
Yeah, not lacking scruples, I think, is the charitable way of putting it. And I think the difference with Tepper, because I would just draw a comparison, like Steve Cohen, who bought the Mets, right? Who's a hedge fund billionaire of note, bought the New York Mets baseball team, my baseball team, and Uncle Steve has poured money in. The difference is he grew up being a fan of the team, so that does put it in a different type of position. Whereas David Tepper was, I think, on the ownership group of the Steelers, correct, at one time.
Oh, probably. And listen, the Roonies are not the most scrupulous people, and no offense.
So he wasn't saying, "Well, it's Carolina or bust for me." It's like I would like to.
I want to be on at the table, right? I want to be one of the guys who owns one of the 32. And there's a lot more people like that. What the Waltons got into the NFL? Why? Because they had so much money, didn't know what else to do with it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there are lots of people who can compartmentalize and be ruthless at work because that's their job, and then go home and be generally good humans. There are a lot of people who work in finance I wouldn't want to work for. And if you're a fan of a team, you want your owner to be someone people want to go work for because you want to attract talent. Sean McVay can go work for anybody. Stan Kroenke, who owns the Rams, is not known as being a nice guy to deal business with, but he's known at being a great guy if you're on his team, right? He takes care of his people.
Right.
Now he might not take care of the city he's in. He might not take care of some other, right. St. Louis would have something to say about Stan Kroenke being a good dude, but he takes care of his own. And when you got a guy who chucks his drink at fans, like, dude, you own the team. You're a billionaire. You've got every privilege in the world. Just take it. Just, got us again. Damn it. We're going to have to work on this.
We'll be better next year.
Go get in your helicopter and go home. But the idea that, and listen, Carolina sold the team to him because they had to run Richardson out of town. Jerry Richardson was not a nice guy for other reasons. And you think, all right, maybe we got a better one. And it's one bad. I have absolutely had one bad day and done things I'm embarrassed I've done. And maybe David Tepper had a bad day and did something he's now embarrassed he's done. But sitting in your luxury box and pouring your drink out on opposing teams' fans literally from your throne, if you will, like to me that's a
and also
bad deal.
It's the Jags. Like, it's not like it's the Panthers' biggest rivals, or it's like it's kind of a nothing game at the end of a nothing season that means nothing. Sure, you got embarrassed. Yes, these things happen. And we can all agree, if it was the Patriots fans, we would have all said, this is great. But it was, yeah, exactly. To your point, it's not great. And it kind of puts a capper on what's been a complete disaster. And the Panthers propping up the DFI this year. Tim, we're going to wrap on that. We've got a couple of things to hit on before we go. Of course, number one of these is to name this week's Jonas Gray Memorial Player of the Week. We talked about crappy teams. We talked about crap. Now we're going to praise someone for doing something impressive for a change. And this week's Jonas Gray Memorial Teaspoon winner, Tim, I can reveal to you, is Lil Jordan Humphrey, wide receiver, Denver Broncos, 6'4", 225-pound wide receiver from Southlake, Texas, which is the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area, as I'm reliably informed it's called. An undrafted free agent in the 2019 NFL draft. The Jonas Gray player, of course, someone who comes out of nowhere to do something amazing. And what Lil Jordan was able to do was make one of the highlight plays of this entire NFL season, which I'll come to at the end of this so that people keep listening. The first question people have is, why the hell is this guy called Lil Jordan Humphrey? It's not a nickname.
No,
it is not Sauce Gardner. It is not Juice Scruggs. There's
on the certificate.
Out there, right? His name is Lil Jordan. Do you know why his name is Lil Jordan?
His dad, Big Jordan?
No. So his older brother wanted him to be named Michael after Michael Jordan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his mum decided, nah, I'm just going to go off piece, and she called him Lil Jordan instead. That was all the information I could find. So if his mum is out there and listening to the podcast, please tell us, because I am curious as to how you came. LIL' Jordan. So
that's
it's
amazing.
A great name. He was an all-state running back at Carroll High School in Southlake. He was 6'4", 200 pounds when he left high school. So yeah, that's going to work. He had an interest from Cal, Colorado, Illinois, and Duke, but he ended up going to Texas, University of Texas, where he played for 3 years, staying in state. Freshman year, mainly special teams. Started to get some reps in his sophomore year. Caught a few balls. It was really his junior year that he came alive. He was the leading receiver on the team. 86 catches, 1,176 yards, and 9 touchdowns for the Longhorns in a year they lost to the Oklahoma Sooners in the Big 12 championship game. Sad for them, but he had a great year. 3rd most yards in a season ever for a receiver at the University of Texas, which is, no slouch, has had some good teams over the years. Only the 8th player to eclipse 1,000 yards in school history. So you think, well, how can this guy A, go undrafted, and B, be a Jonas Gray player? You were a standout player who made, historic statistical feats at one of the biggest universities for football in the entire country.
Uh-huh.
He declared for the NFL draft as a junior, so forewent, as I believe I should say, his final year of eligibility. And then he went to the combine. So this guy must be set up for success. Unfortunately for Lil Jordan, not the best timed speed out there. 4.75 at the combine, and at his pro day.
At wide receiver?
And at his pro day, 4.82.
It didn't get better. It didn't get better.
So usually what happens with guys who run crappy combine times is they'll go to their pro day and somehow run much faster because it's timed by the coaches at the school who want the guy to get drafted high. So generally they will try and bump the guy. No. So he was seen as a kind of jump ball, box out guy, maybe even a tight end conversion prospect. Like that really hurt him. When you're a bigger wide receiver and you run slow, people go, because there just aren't many guys who are big and slow who are good. Like you think of guys who ran bad 40 times, like Anquan Bolden is always the example that was used, or Jerry Rice even. Like they're different types of players. He was quite stiff, tall guy, not that fluid. So you think, is this ever going to translate? Very hard to play that way in the NFL and be successful.
By the way, can I just pause you?
You may.
Just for 1 second. I love how you've got tons of tape of a guy being successful as a wide receiver playing football on a field with 22 players, but he doesn't run as fast in a straight line, and so he plummets. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I think, unfortunately for him, it's kind of been borne out in his NFL career today. Like, he wasn't drafted at all. Yep. So even despite his collegiate achievements, didn't get drafted. 28 receivers were taken in 2019. He did not make the cut, which is that's tough on anyone let alone someone who's achieved as much as he had, as you say. That class, by the way, 2019, not bad. AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Debo Samuel, and Deontay Johnson. So there were some players out there. Now, there was also N'Keal Harry and Andy Isabella and JJ Arcega-Whiteside and a bunch of guys who never did anything. But, there was some talent out there is what I'm trying to say. Made the journey down to New Orleans, Louisiana, to be signed by the Saints as an undrafted free agent. Then he went, the classic practice, didn't make the roster, practice squad at final cuts, then back on the roster, then practice squad, then, bounced between, which loads of players do. Did that in 2019, did that in 2020. 2021 had 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, started to maybe make a wave or two, a little ripple in the pond of the NFL, but wasn't to be. 2022 was meant to go back to the Saints, failed his physical, and they voided the offer. So now he's without a team. He had to wait until June, so sitting on the couch for a couple months, which is not great, to sign with the wide receiver factory, which is the New England Patriots, who then, even they put him on the practice squad. Then he was back on the carousel, practice squad, active roster, blah, blah, blah. So he's been bouncing up and down throughout his entire career. Same story with the Broncos, signed in 2023 on a 1-year deal. Up and down, practice squad, active roster. Now the Broncos are in the kind of lost season territory. They've got quite a lot of good receivers on that team. He's not really had much of a chance. But in this game, Tim, against Eastern Sticks Los Angeles Chargers, which of course everyone tuned into, banner NFL game that it was.
I don't think
there was
anybody
only
watched this game.
No, absolutely not. There was one touchdown scored in this game. 16-9 was the final. One touchdown was scored, but what a touchdown it was. It was scored by Lil Jordan Humphrey, one of his 2 catches for 69 yards on the day. Yeah. So not a huge volume, but the play, honestly, one of the best plays I've seen this season by an individual player, like to make something out of nothing. There's been quite a few, like the T. Higgins one from a couple of weeks ago, right? Was up there.
He caught the ball at the 40, Luke. At the 40.
Let's set the scene. Let's give this guy his flowers, right? 3rd and 8 for Denver from their own 46-yard line. 6 minutes and 40 seconds left in the second quarter. Jarrett Stidham steps up. Jarrett Stidham is flushed. Jarrett Stidham finds Lil Jordan Humphrey on the crossing route at the 40-yard line. Great. We converted a 3rd and 8. Good for you. He's being trailed. The guy's right behind him. You think, okay, just get forward, couple extra yards. We'll go to the first down. We'll be good. He's not satisfied. He runs a little stop juke on the corner who falls to the ground. Has his ankles broken. Stiff arms another defensive back.
In doing so, takes out another defensive back.
Takes out his own guy, who Lil Jordan Humphrey stiff arms for good measure. He jukes a guy at the 3rd-yard line who reaches an arm out, can't bring him down. He cuts inside. 2 defenders hit him at the 5-yard line. He's lunging. He scores a touchdown, 54 yards to pay dirt. And Lil Jordan Humphrey with that play earning the Jonas Gray Memorial Teaspoon for Week 17 of 2023. Tim, honestly, a phenomenal play.
Oh, it's
a phenomenal play in a game that had no right to deserve it. None. But it was a great play, and he earned a teaspoon.
I am so happy that Jared Stidham threw this football. Because if Russell Wilson had thrown this football, we would be hearing about how Russell Wilson wills his team to touchdowns. This is the most Russell Wilsonist play of all time. He runs around, he dinks and dunks, he sticks his head under, he flicks the ball out to into the flat effectively. And then guy absolutely goes ham for 50 yards.
He went full beast mode. It was Marshawn Lynch-esque.
But because it was Jared Stidham throwing the ball, Lil Jordan's going to get his due, and he gets his teaspoon. And so happy for Lil Jordan. Couple of quick hitters for you, Luke.
I have one for you as well, Tim.
I'm going to let you go first, and then I'll wrap it. Go.
Okay. So my one is more of similar to last week. I got a kind of statement for you, which I just thought was interesting that I looked up. So we talk about the changing face of the NFL a lot, right? Offensive-driven league, it's a passing league, defensive rule changes, etc., and so on. This season, just get your thoughts on this. Each of the top 13 teams in scoring points per game are currently slated to make the playoffs.
Okay.
13 of 14. So only 14 positions. 13 of them are occupied by the top 13 scorers in points per game in the NFL. The Saints are currently 14th, and they have a shot at making the postseason. So that would make it all 14, I believe. Because the only team that's not in the top 14 in points per game who is currently slated to make the playoffs is Tampa, who are 19th. So interesting. I know the question is then, well, what about the defense? Of the top 13 defenses in points per game, only 6 are currently slated to make the playoffs, and 3 of the bottom 10 are going to make the postseason, which is the Lions and 2 of them are definitely in Lions and Eagles, and the other team is the Colts in the bottom 10 in points per game. So the league is changing. Points is more important. Offense is more important.
Yeah.
We both lamented offensive woes of our respective franchises.
That's right.
It's becoming more and more of a thing, as evidenced by the fact that everyone in the postseason scores points. You can't get in without scoring points. I don't care how good your defense is. Just thought an interesting nugget and a note on how the league is changing. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the thoughts I have on that are it's inevitable. The NFL wants this to happen. It's been going this way for a long time. And as a fan of a team who's historically had a good defense, it's sad to me in some ways, but points are fun. Catches are fun. Defensive pass interference is, more fun than watching the ball hit the ground and not get yards. The NFL wants to have enough defense to be plausibly a realistic competition, right? They don't want to become the arena league. Really. Yeah, well, that's what I mean. They want big plays. They want turnovers, sacks. They want every they want every play to be a resounding success for one team or the other. Right. And so the things that are not fun to watch, incomplete passes, 2-yard runs into the line of scrimmage, all of this stuff is going to go away. We're making it harder to do the things that aren't fun to watch. And so, hey, that's football. It's 2024. Either get with the times or find the new sport. There are others out there. If you would like less entertaining sports, baseball is available. If you would like faster paced sports where you only have to watch the last 3 minutes, basketball is available to you. And hockey for people who want lots of excitement in person and snoozers on the television. So that's what I would tell you. But Luke, I have a couple of quick hits for you. Matter of fact, I'm going to trim it to one, just given the fact that we have run a bit long today. Number one, and the only one you're going to get from me today is the Baltimore Ravens have the league best point differential with 210. 210 more points.
That's a lot.
And it's been 16 games, so comparable over history.
Right. Yep.
There is exactly one other team who over a 16-game season, or 17 last 2 years, has been able to accumulate 210 more points than their offense, 200 points even. The only other team to do better than 200 points in points differential over the last decade is whom and in what year?
I'll go with the 2013 Denver Broncos.
So the 2013 right? Denver Broncos,
where Manning had the 50 touchdown passes. I think it was 2013.
Was 207. Oh, and so very, very well done. Very, very well done. The only other team to eclipse 200, and I was actually
Seahawks.
No.
Okay, I'm out. You go.
The 2018 Baltimore Ravens.
Wow.
Only team done it since the Broncos 10 years ago.
That was when they were the 1 seed, right?
The Ravens
when
twice.
The MVP?
And the last time was when Lamar won MVP and your Titans picked them apart and demolished them in Baltimore. And so it'll be interesting to see.
Happier times.
If history repeats itself. Won't be the Titans demolishing them, but they will almost certainly be unbelievably heavily favored in their divisional round game, much like they were that year. Be interesting to see if Lamar can shake some of the Lamar playoff bugaboos out there. But that's going to do it for us here on the half-yard line. Baltimore having a historic season, good on both sides of the ball. You have to be to get the points differential where they're trending. 30 points better, by the way, than the next best team, which is just nuts. But hey, we'll see. It's got to translate into postseason success, or no one remembers the 2018 Baltimore Ravens. That's going to do it here for the half-yard line. Check us out on the socials, at Half Yard Line Pod, Insta, Twitter, other things.
TikTok.
Threads.
YouTube.
Gmail, halfyardlinepod@gmail.com. Hit us out on YouTube. We'd love to see you, talk to you, hear from you. Until next week, be good.
Happy New Year, folks.
Bye.